All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I know we may have a couple more hop on as we get to the little bit past noon. Everybody's probably grabbing their lunch. I'm working on my coffee from this morning still. It's been a couple meetings this morning, so I'd like to finish that at some point. But anyway, we are glad to have Brooke Anderson back. I know some of you were with us for part one last month, which was great information. We had great feedback from that. And we will share these recordings. So in case you need to catch up on that one, you can. But we have her back today for part 2 of 3. So also join us next month for the wrap up. But we are excited to have her. I always give Brooke a huge shout out because she is one of our absolute go-to speakers. She has so much knowledge. She's such a good presenter. We actually just had her as part of our chamber state conference that was here in Stanton a couple weeks ago. She was one of our breakout speakers and heard a lot of great things about that. So she always has good information. You can always reach out to her with questions, advice. Converge does tons of different things, which I'm sure she'll share with us, but I'm going to turn it right over to Brooke. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat as we go. We will try and catch those at the end. So Brooke, thank you again for your time, and we will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. I always am so honored with Courtney's. She's a great hype woman. So if you, as we all know, by being members of the chamber or speakers or whatever the case may be. So I always appreciate her introductions. So I'm going to pull up my screen here to get us going with the slideshow. But as Courtney mentioned, I am Brooke Anderson. I am the CCO at Converge, and Converge is a full service marketing agency. So I'm going to kick us off by just talking a little bit about what we do. We are going to review the trends that we talked about last time in case you missed that presentation. So we'll review those briefly. I'm going to talk a little bit about some foundational things that we need to keep in mind as we are working through the trends. And then we'll go into the new trends that we'll be talking about today. And then, like Courtney said, we will have a part 3 of this. I put the trends sort of with the biggest bulk of information at the beginning. So in part 3, we'll be going over probably about 4 trends in that presentation. So sign up for that one if you haven't already. All right. So as I mentioned, Converge is a full service marketing agency. That is sort of the most boring way to describe what we do. We are that, but we are also big project supporters, nonprofit sponsors, volunteers, and community supporters. That's a big foundation into who we are. We are based here in the Shenandoah Valley, even though we serve clients throughout Virginia and beyond at this point. But I think what you'll find with Converge is that we really put community first, and we view our work as a full service marketing agency really as a way to help businesses and business leaders and entrepreneurs make their dreams come true. So that's really at the core who we are. These are some of the clients. You may recognize some of these that we have worked with over the years, and this is not an exhaustive list, but we are certainly very honored to be able to work with a lot of folks that are based right here in the Valley as well. And you will probably recognize some of those folks on this list. So in terms of what we do, we're full service, which means we basically do everything from business cards to very complex lead generation campaigns. We have a sign and graphics portion of our business. So we can, again, do your business cards, we can do signage for you, we can wrap your vehicle, and then you are under one roof in terms of being able to access all the other marketing services that we offer. So we try to really, really fully support our clients in whatever way that they need and however they come in to the business. Oh, let me back one up here. This is a list, and you will have this access to this presentation. So this is just a list of more specifics of the various services that we have. And one thing that I always say about what I do is I'm basically a glorified storyteller. Everything in marketing really comes down to the stories that you tell. And we will talk a little bit more about why that's so important in one of the other sections of this presentation. All right. So when we're talking about trends, there are some things I want you guys to keep in mind. The word trends almost makes it seem as if these will be things that are passing fads. That is not necessarily the case. We, as a marketing agency, we certainly keep an eye on the forecast year to year of what the trends are going to be. More often than not, these do come to light and play an important role in the marketing for that specific year. There are always things that might become more important or less important, but we're not talking about passing fads. We are presenting these because we are confident that these are things that you are going to want to keep in mind as you are thinking through the marketing for your own business or organization. The other thing to keep in mind, in the last presentation, in this presentation, but especially in the third presentation, there are going to be some things that I talk about that you might think, oh, there's no way that that would ever make it to the Shenandoah Valley or wherever I'm based, or that's not going to really become a thing. But if you think about it, at one point, websites were this new thing that everybody was questioning. Social media was a new thing everybody was questioning. And so again, we picked these specific trends because we do think these are actually going to be actionable items that people are going to be working through in 2022 and beyond. So just keep that in mind as we're going through things. All right. So one of the things that I always reiterate, because it's such a good foundation for how we think through how we're going to structure our own marketing, but also this is just kind of some good life hack advice. So I want to review for those of you that were here before, and then for those of you that are new, this might be new information, but I wanted to review the modes of persuasion. And the reason why is because it is a proven fact that as human beings with the brains that we have, we are always looking for three main things to evaluate whether we're going to basically trust someone. In the business world, it would be, are we going to do business with this company? So there are three main things that we're looking for. And if we can inject these three main things into our marketing, into our content, into the 30-second elevator pitch that we're giving to somebody, we astronomically increase our odds of being able to impact them in a way that will inspire them to do business with us, not just for the moment, but for the long term, if we continue to use this strategy. So the modes of persuasion boil down to three main things. And there are some fancy Latin words for these, but basically there's ethos, and that means credibility or character. So are you somebody that I feel like has the street cred that I can trust you? Logos, which stands for logic or reason, which basically means, does what you say make sense? So you might have all the credibility in the world, but if what you're saying doesn't make sense, then I'm going to start to question you, and I'm not going to feel like I can trust you as well. And then the third one is pathos, and that's the emotion or connection. So what we typically find with businesses, and these are businesses on all scales, but what we typically find is businesses are very comfortable basically fulfilling the credibility and the logic boxes. Those boil down to what you do and how you do it. What people often miss is that emotion or connection piece. And I don't care what kind of business you have the opportunity to make an emotional connection with your audience. Not only do you have the opportunity to do it, but you should always be thinking about how you can do it. To clarify, when I say emotion or connection, I'm not always meaning high drama, right? So I'm not talking about a commercial that's going to make someone cry necessarily. Humor is a wonderful way to connect with people. Having a very fun, nurturing process for your clients can create a sense of being part of a tribe, and that creates connection. So when we're thinking through the modes of persuasion, it's really important that you consider all three of these. And for most of you, you're going to want to put a special emphasis on that pathos, that emotion connection piece, because that's the one that often gets missed. I have an example of a company that does pathos really, really well further on in the slide. But if you look at the heavy hitters in the industry, like the Apples of the world or the Subarus of the world, they hang their hat on the pathos piece. They will tell you what they do and how they do it, but they are going to draw you in using that emotional connection piece. And we'll go into that a little bit more. I saw this in action. I worked for Coca-Cola headquarters in Atlanta, and this is the formula that we used in a lot of our marketing campaigns. It was basically the basis for all the content that we generated. So when you combine the modes of persuasion with knowing your audience, and notice that I use the word knowing, not guessing, but when you really know who your audience is and you use these three things, your audience is going to view your content and your marketing from a standpoint of, man, these people really, really get me. And that's what you always want to be driving towards. All right. There's also one more mode of persuasion that I want to mention because it's often forgotten about. It's called Kairos, and it basically boils down to sending the right message at the right time. So keep that in mind when you are working with those modes of persuasion. There are going to be better times than others to deploy your messaging. And so making sure that you are sending out the right messaging at the right time, but not only that, that you are responding to things that are impactful in the moment that are going on in your world at large, right? So for some of you, that's going to be responding to what's happening in current events. For some of you, that's going to be timing some of your marketing based off of what the budget cycles are for your clients. So right timing is an essential part of this. And then the other essential part is the storytelling. So storytelling is really your most powerful weapon when it comes to having a message that people are going to remember. That's what you want your marketing to be centered around. And storytelling is the way to do that. There was a Harvard Business Review study that said people remember stories 22% more than any other way of giving them information. I would argue that it's way higher than that. And in terms of how that relates to the modes of persuasion, I've given you some examples here. Again, you'll have the ability to review this in more detail after the presentation. But these are some ways and some points that you can start crafting your story that also involve the modes of persuasion, so that you're using all of that for your benefit. The third piece of foundational marketing theory that I want us to be locked in on as we talk through these trends is the buyer's journey roadmap. Now, some of you may have buyers, you may call them customers, you may call them members, whatever the case may be. But this is basically the process people go through when they're thinking of buying a product or a service. And so it breaks down into stages. And so there's the awareness stage where basically people are realizing they have a problem to solve or an unfulfilled need. That prompts some discomfort in them. And so they start doing some research on how can I solve this? That filters them into the interest stage where they are basically going to places like Google to search for options. They're asking friends for advice. They might be looking at your reviews, things like that. They then filter into a consideration stage where they have clearly identified what their problem or issue is, and they start to actually consider solutions. And so you might be on a list of, 3 possible businesses that they're looking at, and you want to make sure that your marketing is aligned to again be set up so that they feel like you're speaking directly to them in this stage. And then after they choose you, they're in a decision stage, and you're going to be wanting to reiterate their decisions and validating that they made the right choice for you. And then the 5th stage that people often forget about is a lot of times we get excited, rightfully so, that, oh, we've gained a new client or a customer or a member, and now we've got them, and then marketing towards them sort of falls off the radar. But the very important 5th stage of all of this is nurturing the customers, clients, members that you already have. And so you need to have a plan of action where you are validating for your current clients that they did the right thing by becoming a customer of you. That's how you create what we call raving fans. So that's a lot of theory thrown at you, but it basically boils down to using the modes of persuasion to conceptualize your marketing, making sure that you're using storytelling to your advantage, and making sure that you understand that buyer's journey. Take a close look at that and see what you can be doing at each stage to encourage that person to progress so that they become a client, customer, or member of yours. All right, so our trends for that we already talked about in our last session. Some of you are new. We have some people that have been here before, but just as a quick review, what we learned in our last session is that the pandemic has changed consumers. Now, consumer behavior tends to fluctuate, here and there throughout the years, but we had a major world event that we all participated in, like it or not, and that was the pandemic. And the pandemic did not only change our personal lives, it changed the way we do business, and it changed what consumers are most concerned with and what they're focusing on. So just as a review with that, again, consumer behavior and what is important to them has been very, very impacted by the pandemic. It is a world event that we do not have precedent for in, recent history, and it has just swung the pendulum in a very wide arc in terms of how it's impacted people and how they're doing business, and also what kinds of marketing they're responding to. So basically right now in 2022, what we're seeing is consumers aren't just evaluating you on if you're better than your competition. That matters, but your customers are evaluating you based on their last great experience. And so just because I've been a customer of yours for the past, 2 years or so, doesn't mean that I'm not willing to fall off. That's what we're seeing in terms of the 2022 consumer. They're willing to leave places that they have previously been loyal to if they don't feel like they're consistently getting a great experience. There's a lot of competition out there for their dollars. And so it's not enough to just outrank your competition, get the client in, and then sort of get comfortable. You need to be evaluating every experience they have to make sure it's a great one. Consumers are also expecting a seamless digital process and hyper-personalized experience. So one of the things that happened is the pandemic hit, everybody pivoted either in a new way or in a deeper way into the digital world to be able to do a lot of the business that had to take place. What happened with that is consumers are now used to that level of digital experience when they go online. So we don't see a trend where they're going to pivot back from that. They're going to expect that your digital process is locked in and very user friendly, and they want a hyper personalized experience from you. So this boils down to any sort of way that you can make it feel like, hey, I'm marketing directly to Mary Louise, or I'm marketing directly to Jen Jones or Haley Jacobs. That can come down to small details, like if you send out an email newsletter, making sure it's set up so that it says, hello, Haley, hello, Bruce, in the greeting, having their name in your email subject line. Any way that you can create a hyper personalized experience, that's what these consumers are looking for. And then the other thing is customer service is holistic. It's not just a department. So everybody from the janitor to the CEO needs to be on the same page in how we treat customers. That seems like a very simple thing, but 2022 consumers are very, very discerning, and they are going to notice gaps in the customer service experience. Not only are they going to notice the gaps, but they are living their best life in the digital world, and they are very likely to be vocal about it. And so you need to make sure that your customer service experience is not just something that is segmented to a department, but that every single person on your team knows what that is, what that means, and is executing it properly. All right. The other trend we talked about in the first session is corporate responsibility and corporate social responsibility, to be even more specific. And that basically means that consumers are looking to do business with places that can demonstrate ethics, transparency, and inclusion, not just towards an external cause, but internally by how you treat your workforce and your customers. What did we see during the pandemic? And in large part, it's still going on. We not only had the pandemic, but we had something called the Great Resignation. And that was basically people getting fed up with their work environments, being very, very vocal about it, calling to light some things that were unfair practices. And people in 2022, in terms of consumerism, want to feel good about the business that they are doing business with. And they are looking at that under quite a microscope. It boils down to these categories from what the data tells us. It boils down to they want to do business with places that can show some sort of environmental responsibility. Businesses are a huge contributor to environmental waste, and they want to know that you're doing something to take some sort of level of environmental responsibility, so that if you can address that, that is key. Ethical responsibility basically means that you are treating everybody internally and externally fairly. Philanthropic responsibility is still a very important part of this. So they do want to know that your business has outside interest and is making the world a better place in some way. And that's, supporting outside organizations, volunteer days at your businesses. Maybe you contribute a certain number of hours pro bono, whatever it is, they are still looking for that piece. That's the piece everybody has been focused on, but these other things are really coming into play. And then economic responsibility, basically that you are a good steward of your money. And if you have shareholders or other people that you are responsible for, that you are being responsible with those dollars. All right, so that's a review of the 2020 or the first two trends of 2022 that we discussed. I also threw in a philanthropic responsibility example from Subaru, which I talked about earlier. And I threw this in for two reasons. One, it shows philanthropic responsibility. Two, it shows how they were using Kairos, which is they did the right thing at the right time and had the right message at the right time, because what they were responding to were the California wildfires, which were a current event at this time that this came out. And three, that they are doing it in a way that kind of combines the philanthropic responsibility with also that environmental responsibility. So some of these things are going to be overlapping, but they do a good job. They did a good job with this campaign for that. All right, so let's dive into our next set of trends. So the first trend I'm calling grounded marketing. And basically, that boils down to this statement, and it might seem kind of harsh, but it's super important. Basically, grounded marketing means that we are using data to our advantage. And without data, you're basically just another person with an opinion. 2022 consumers want the proof in the pudding. You should also want the proof in the pudding, because that takes a huge weight off your shoulders of having to guess at so many things. And we'll get into what some of those things are. As a marketing agency and as a marketing professional, like, I eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff, but I check the ego at the door and also remain open to what the data is going to tell me. I can make guesses all day long, a lot, and educated guesses, and a lot of them may be right, but without the data, one, I can't back those up. I'm not going to be able to track. And the data will often tell you things that you did not think of, or it might trend in a way that you were not expecting. It is invaluable. That word data has almost become like a four-letter word, though, because people think data and they think, oh my gosh, this is going to be super complicated. What we're talking about here is incorporating data tracking in a way that makes the most sense for your business. And basically, you have to start somewhere. So we're encouraging you to start somewhere. All right, so let's get into some nitty gritty. So some things to consider. One of the things that we've noticed about 2022 consumers, previously we talked in marketing about target audiences. Okay, so we would say like, we would identify who your target audiences are. Because of the influence of the pandemic, we are seeing more and more and more like micro subsections of those audiences that will have different marketing needs. So if you aren't using data to track those micro audiences, so many things are going to get lost in the shuffle. So what would that look like? That could look like, let's take Augusta County, for example. I could say Augusta County is my target market. In 2022, what I'm saying is Augusta County is my target market, but this neighborhood is a subsection of that. And I'm going to market to them differently than I would market to this neighborhood over there. We work for a technology company, and they cover a very wide footprint. But one of the subsections they have is a very, very rural market. And what happened in the pandemic to them? What happened was, if you did not have internet during the pandemic, your kids were going to fall behind in school. You were going to fall behind potentially at work. Like, we have a whole different campaign for that rural market in what we are in our messaging than we do to their whole entire other footprint. So think in subsections these days with 2022 consumers. Cookie cutter marketing doesn't cut it anymore. So all of our marketing, remember, they want hyper personalized engagement with you. So our marketing is unique. We are no longer, we can no longer just blanket apply certain things across industries. One of the things that means is that because my marketing isn't cookie cutter, more than ever, data is important, because I need to be tracking myself on how well these things are performing. We can't just rely on previous metrics to inform that. And then, to know your audience subsections, the other thing that you need to do is you need to know what is important to them specifically. So part of what you're going to be doing in driving towards that goal of knowing what's important to them is understanding what content your customer responds best to. Content is king in the digital world, right? And you can come up with an editorial calendar. You can say, we're going to do, these types of posts. We're going to make sure that they include the modes of persuasion. But until your content is out there in the world, and unless you're testing it against other forms of content that you're using, you're not going to know how well it's actually performing. So you want to track your content in terms of engagement. If you're going to get very, very deep into it, you might be tracking things like your cost per click, to see not only is your content impactful, but is it actually leading to customers? Is it actually giving you a good return on your investment? We're going to use data to identify what's most important to your consumers. And I have a slide a little further down. It might be next, but what we saw is that what was important to consumers pre-pandemic took a pretty wide shift during these last 2 years. So what's important to your consumers? Is it price? Is it social responsibility? Is it customer service? If you are not collecting data from them, if you're not soliciting feedback from them on these things, you're never really fully going to know. And again, we're into facts, not guessing. Data, like I said, it can seem as if it's super overwhelming. I encourage you to start where you are. If you have a marketing list, maybe the only two things that you're going to track right now are open rates and click-through rates. That's fine. That's still going to give you information that you can use to determine, oh, what are people most interested in, and drive towards using more of that content. For some of you that are further along in the game, You might be setting up A/B testing for your Facebook ads. My point is, don't be too overwhelmed by it. It gives you an opportunity to learn more. Start where you are with what you can. Be open to being surprised, right? Like, data is so amazing because when you combine data with creativity, you really get the golden combination of what good marketing is made of. But to do that, you have to drop your assumptions at the door. There are a lot of intuitive, sort of boots on the ground theories that we can come up with about our audiences, but data really solidifies whether that's true or not. And then you'll want to educate yourself, and not only yourself, but your team about which metrics are most important. So there's a ton of metrics that you can be using. In 100% transparency, some of those metrics are going to mean more than others. We're not looking for data that is just fluff. You're looking for the data that is going to drive towards what you're really wanting to know. That could be a whole entire webinar series in and of itself. If that's something people are interested in, like, we'd be glad to tackle that. But knowing which metrics are most important is key. So let's say you start with measuring, your email metrics. Make sure you're educated about what those metrics actually mean, so that you're not just tracking something that at the end of the day doesn't really tell you much. And not only should you understand that, but your team should understand why that's important, because ultimately it's going to drive some of your decision making. All right. So along the lines of that, I wanted to show you one of the studies that came out of looking at 2022 projections in terms of consumers. So this was consumer index that was done that basically asked people what was most important to them as a consumer in 2022. And what your focus is going to be is, one, determining what this is for your own audience, but you can also use this as a guide to fill in some gaps that you might have in your current marketing. One of the things we saw is there was a huge swing towards people putting affordability first. So basically living within their means and their budget, focusing less on brands and more on product functionality. So if you're someone here that's like, well, I don't sell products, I sell services, that applies as well, because one of the things you're really having to prove more than ever to people is, like, what is their return on investment going to be, especially if your service is something that is a want and not necessarily a need. So addressing specifically return on investment for products and services is going to be key. Anytime there is a major disruptor in the market, as we all know, whether it be stock market, whether it be war, or whether it be the pandemic, people tend to tighten their purse strings. And this doesn't mean that these people that are concerned about affordability first might not be able to afford your product or service, but they are concerned about looking at that like never before. The other thing that's probably not surprising to any of us is people are concerned about protecting their health. So 25% protecting their health is the most important part of what they're looking for. They are looking for products that they can trust and minimizing risks in the way that they shop. We'll probably see this loosen up a bit the further away from the pandemic we get, but right now it is super important. People putting the planet first is third. So along with the pandemic, issues like issues about the environment, have not slowed down any. And so there are people that are really focused on that. And that also goes back to the point about the corporate social responsibility. How are you letting people know that you're a good environmental steward? And then society first is fourth. So working together for the greater good, buying from organizations that they find to be honest and transparent, like it or not. We have had a big blend in terms of what is happening culturally, and businesses sort of being put in more and more of a position to take a stand on those things. So there may be varying levels of that amongst the people that we have in this webinar today, but those things are going to become more and more inextricably linked. So social, what is good for the greater good is something consumers are looking at in 2022, and then experiences. So living in the moment, making the most out of life. I think the pandemic had us all sort of do an audit of our priorities. And so 12% of people are stating that experience first is what's most important for them. The cool news about those people is that they're open to new products, brands, experiences, new ways of doing things, people that might not have been chamber members before, that were, in the midst of the pandemic and may have felt more like a solopreneur than an entrepreneur, and realizing like, oh my gosh, I really do need connection with other businesses. Maybe like, oh, now the chamber is a great solution for this. So people are, having sort of some tough conversations with themselves about what they are prioritizing. All right. The other thing is that we're going to be able to use the data that you collect to create some of that holistic messaging that we talked about earlier. This is an example I used in the first session, but it applies here as well. So this is a statement on the website of Patagonia. And this is just a good example of how they use what they know about their audience, what they know is important to 2022 consumers, and they spell it all out of how they are holistically addressing those things. And so using this as a template to kind of start formulating some messaging for yourself would be a really good idea. So you can see that they address everything from guaranteeing everything they make, which inspires trust, to keeping your gear in play, which means, hey, we're not just out here to try to make money. We're out here so that we provide you with the best product. And we're also protecting the environment in the meantime by not just putting more and more gear out. And then they also do a give back for every sale. So they pledge 1% of sales to the environment. So this is just an example of how one of the heavy hitters is doing it. I am not endorsed by Patagonia, although I am open to that. So Patagonia, if you see this, knock on my door. I think they do an excellent job with their marketing. So if you're looking for some inspiration marketing, check them out. All right. Whether we like it or not, the fourth trend is also about data. And so it kind of swings in the other direction. So we've just stated about why it's so important to be tracking some data. But the other thing that has been simultaneously important for 2022 consumers, and even before that, is an expectation of privacy. So we want to collect all this data. But one of the things that consumers are also concerned about is their privacy. That is an issue that is 100% here to stay. That is on the trends list. But what we're seeing, one of the reasons it made the trends list for 2022 specifically is because as I'll show you, there's some heavy hitters that are rolling out some privacy protection methods that are going to get the attention of everybody. So how do we address this trend of consumers wanting to know that their privacy and their data is protected? I mentioned the heavy hitters, and they are sort of setting the pace for a lot of this. So you'll notice that throughout this particular section, I reference Apple a lot. Apple is so concerned with it that they make the bold statement of privacy. That's iPhone. So basically, if you want the most protection of your data possible, join the iPhone team. So the very first thing that you want to ask yourself is, one, do you have a privacy plan? And if not, you need to start collecting one. I don't care if you sell cupcakes or you sell cars or you're a hospital. You're going to need a privacy plan. It does not have to be an overcomplicated thing, but you need to be able to answer the question, how do you protect my data? Should a customer ask you that question? And it needs to be somewhere that is accessible. So that could look like being a link in the bottom of your website, but you need to have a privacy plan. again, that could be a whole nother session in talking about how you come up with those. But if you're a hospital, things like HIPAA, you're going to have like lots of regulations that come into play that are going to guide you. If you're just a solopreneur, there are a lot of templates that you can look at. I would encourage you to look at those. If you're someone that is unsure of any of this, that would be a good thing to just double check by a lawyer that you might use. If you do have a privacy plan, that's awesome. Now is the time to reiterate that. So creating some sort of content that reiterates to your audience that you do in fact have a plan in place will speak to those 2022 consumers that are concerned about their data. So I mentioned that one of the reasons that this made the marketing trend list for 2022 is because we have some heavy hitters that have been doing some work around this for the past couple of years. So probably one of the biggest things to come to light recently is that in 2022, Apple gave users the ability to deny being tracked by third-party apps. So if you are an Apple user, you will see a message similar to the one right here on the screen that asks you, do you want to be tracked by this app or not? The interesting thing about this is that most people are going to say, nope, I don't want to be tracked. As marketers, what we're looking at is how is that going to play out in real life? Because we all live in this digital world where we are used to going online, going onto our social media feeds and seeing advertising that is basically custom tailored to that because it has been based off our data. So Facebook knew Brooke got a puppy last year. All of a sudden in my news feed, Chewy shows up. Here are the best dog toys you should get. All of these things. I have made purchases. I'm in marketing and I've made purchases based off of those ads. I've gotten comfortable with the fact that when I go online, there's going to be tailored advertising to me. If I deny all 30 third-party apps from tracking me, I'm going to see that decline. They're going to start making guesses at what's relevant to me. And we're wondering if consumers are going to actually get frustrated by that at some point and be more likely to allow some of the more applicable third-party apps to track. So that's something that we're watching. In 2022, Apple is also enacting better privacy features for its email platform, Apple Mail. Anytime Apple does anything, it tends to make the news. And so again, this is going to reiterate to 2022 consumers that data privacy is a thing. Google is also going to be discontinuing the use of third-party cookies on Chrome. So those are some of the, there's more than this, but those are some of the prime things that we're seeing from some of the heavy hitters in the market that tend to get media attention, which then also reminds consumers, hey, data privacy is something I need to be aware of. Okay, so things to consider for your business or organization in terms of creating that privacy plan. You need to have a way that you're obtaining permission to collect the customer data before doing so. That's important so that your customers feel empowered that they're giving you permission. There are also legal reasons that you're going to want to do that. Data is super important. It would be amazing if we had access to all of it. There is not a lot of consumer tolerance for that. So in thinking through your privacy plan, you're going to want to collect as little information as possible, which means you need to put a lot of thought into what is most important for you to know about your consumers. They have little tolerance for giving up that data, and they're going to feel more comfortable with you the less data they have to give you. So what information you do get from them, you need to have it locked in and know that it's the most important information for you. Use the data in a way you have permission for. So every business is going to be different on this. But if you say to customers, we are not going to share your data, make sure you are not sharing it. If on the other hand, you have ways that you would be sharing data, make sure you list those and you stick to those. If there are updates for those, let people know. Again, there are going to be some people that are going to be regulated on by law on certain levels with all of this. So use this information in a way that applies to you. And then state what your safeguard is for hackers, essentially. So what are you doing that protects against unauthorized access to data? That needs to be in your privacy protection plan. Make the data available to your consumers. If I, and this will probably very rarely happen, but if I, Brooke Anderson, come into your business and say, I want to know what data you've collected on me, you should have a way to make that available to your customers. And then have an easy way to find the privacy statement. If it ever comes up, be able to say, it is on our website in the footer under privacy statement. Make it easy for people to be able to find that. This is going to come into play in various ways, like I said, within your businesses, but we have all seen what can happen when there's some sort of violation of this. We're used to seeing like the big examples, but if you're an entrepreneur and there's a privacy issue that comes up within your business, if it's bad enough, that could be a devastating blow. So make sure that you have your privacy plan locked in. It's not only important to you and your business, it's important to 2022 consumers. All right, the fifth trend, we're calling it optimize, optimize, optimize. So what does that mean? So that means that we are focused on the fact that 50 to 85% of people are browsing the internet on their phone. You may have clients, consumers, customers that never see your website on your desktop. So you need to make sure that your platforms, and especially your website, is mobilized for or optimized for mobile. So you would be surprised how many clients that we get that have a website that isn't optimized for mobile, and we'll kind of get into why that can be so devastating. So not only are 50 to 85% of people browsing the internet on their phone, but they're also using their tablets and other methods. So make sure that your website is optimized for all of those platforms. What does that really mean? A couple things. Important information needs to go what we call above the fold. 2022 consumers are very fickle in how much work they're willing to do to find the information that is most important to them. Above the fold refers to an old newspaper term, but basically it means the first quarter of your website needs to house the most important information, whether that's on your desktop or on mobile. What we tend to see is that when people don't focus on mobile optimization, some of the most important information goes below the fold, and you can't have that happen. It has to be above the fold. Keep in mind that customers have a 2-click tolerance on average, 2 clicks to drive them to the next step, 2 clicks to get information. If you have a very complicated user experience, and by complicated, that could mean 3 clicks, you are going to have an increased abandonment rate based on what we're seeing with our marketing trends for 2022. There was more click tolerance when, things like websites and all of that sort of first rolled out. What we're seeing now is that tolerance has decreased very drastically over the years. So 2-click tolerance. Can I get to the most important information or respond to your call to action within 2 clicks? The other thing you want to check is that you're using a responsive design. Responsive design is basically a fail-safe that will sort of make sure that your website responds to whatever screen resolution that it's being viewed on. If you're not using a responsive design, you're going to have a lot more work to do to get things optimized. And there are going to be some things you're not going to be able to do at all. All right. You also want to keep in mind and think in terms of thumb friendly. So a lot of people are like holding their phone and they're like scrolling with their thumbs. So this sounds very, very micro, but can I easily kind of navigate your website, your mobile optimized website in a thumb friendly fashion? If you have an overly complicated menu, that can throw all of that off track. So make sure you keep that in mind. On mobile, on your website in general, but especially on mobile, the thing that is going to make people abandon your site the most is if there is a lot of buffering or they have to wait for things to be downloaded. You must optimize your mobile site for speed, your regular site too, but mobile optimization is where we see speed. It can be a huge barrier. That can mean things like making sure your images are compressed, but you must optimize for speed. The other thing that we know that we can do on phones is we can search for things using our voices. So you're going to want to make sure that your site is mobile optimized for voice search specifically. That again could be a whole other webinar. There's a lot of information out there about that, but that is something that you need to keep in mind. All right. And then also, if you don't remember anything else about this section, remember that user experience is the most important part of any optimization, right? Sometimes what we see is that people can get like, they can't see the forest for the trees because they know how their site is supposed to work. And so they approach their site like, well, this makes sense to me. But what you need to know is, does it make sense to somebody that pulls your site up for the first time and doesn't know anything about you? Is it easy to navigate? Are there clear call to action buttons? Am I not having to click too much? So on and so forth. So we had one question that I'm just seeing. So it says, we are scroll and scan people. Think about your own social media habits. What do you pay attention to? What makes you scroll on by? Absolutely. Thank you for that. That is super important. Okay. All right. So I wrapped up with 8 minutes to go. So if anybody has any questions about this presentation or what I will be sharing in the next presentation, let me know now and we'll go over those.
And Molly had a question. Do you know if there's a site that can look over your website and see how user-friendly it is?
There is, and I can send you a link to that. Yeah, there are some things that you can do in terms of testing that. So I will send out that information.
That's a good thing to do, what, annually probably?
Honestly, it's a good thing to do anytime you're adding anything new to your website. So, I would say more than just annually, depending on how big of, content shifts you have on the website. The other thing to keep in mind about that is so when we approach building websites, we come up with site maps, we come up with wireframes. Those are basically ways that we organize what information is going to be on there, how it's going to be structured, and visually what it's going to look like. I might have to, for mobile optimization purposes, cut like 30% of what you'll be able to see on desktop or rearrange it in a different way. So mobile optimization really takes a keen eye. And the planning of that starts as soon as you start planning your website. You don't want to, like, if you're going to do an overhaul of your website or you're going to build a new one or build one for the first time, mobile optimization needs to be top of mind from day one. Don't build your whole entire website and then suddenly go, oh, we've got to optimize for mobile now. You're going to almost have to start back at square one in a lot of instances. So just make that part of the plan, from the get-go. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Taylor, how are you?
I'm Allison. Taylor's here too, though. But I pulled up the EY index and it says 54% of new behaviors adopted during the pandemic are going to be normal now. When you read that, is that linking to what you put in the webinar about the affordability, the health, the planet, is when we think of that 54%, are those 54% really looking at that affordability and things like that?
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, the 54% that's going to constitute what's normal is really something that we are going to see once we have a little bit more data. right? So if things like supply chain continue to be a problem, then affordability by the time we roll around in November is probably still going to be at the top of people's list. So there's still a story to tell with that. When those breakdowns of what are important to people in 2022, it's more of a forecast, and we're not as confident in how that's going to break down maybe in the second part of the year versus now, just because we don't know. And there's so many question marks about things. Just this morning, I was reading about how the amount of product that you're getting in things is now being impacted. So instead of having, like a 32-ounce Gatorade, the standard is going to be a 28-ounce Gatorade. Instead of toilet paper having this many sheets, it has like 15% less sheets, and that equates to like 1.5 less rolls in your packaging. So we're still sort of navigating those waters. What I feel 100% confident in saying is like the things that we talked about today, like that data privacy, how important collecting data is and basing your marketing off of that. Those are like 100% here to stay. We're just going to see variations in how that plays out. Corporate social responsibility, given the world we live in, where we are inundated with things that are happening in the world because everybody has a cell phone in their pocket, and those things are making the news. Like that corporate social responsibility, that I'm 100% confident here to stay. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about in the next session are going to be things like virtual reality, like how that's going to impact things. That is going to have a longer a longer track record before we can say, is that going to be part of the 54% that's normal? That's going to take a while to become normal, and it will probably be normal on varying levels for the majority of us for a while. Like, is that gonna, that's just something that there's a question mark. So it kind of is an interesting time to be looking at all of this, because normally I would be able to say, yes, I think all of these things are. Some of these things, the question mark really has to do with like current events and how that all plays out. Does that answer your question?
It did. Thank you so much.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I called you. I called you by the name on your little Zoom screen. So sorry about that.
It's okay. I pretend to be Taylor all the time.
Okay, well, hey, that's good. Anybody else have questions? Is there anything else, since the third session is our last session on this, is there anything else that people would like me to like address specifically so that I can make sure to include that?
I don't have anything to add about what I want to hear that presentation, just because I think it's so interesting that we're having to move forward to include that kind of stuff. What you said about all the mobile stuff is great, but my son got a virtual headset, the VR, for Christmas, and he lives in that thing. So I've tried to like watch Netflix and do this and do that in it. And there is still all the advertising and all of the everything that you can do, and it looks different. So it's really neat to see how all of that needs to be adjusted.
Oh my gosh, yes, it is so fascinating. And even, we had Facebook change their name to Meta, and they're creating, the creation of the metaverse and all of that. And, that's one of those topics I was kind of referencing where, that can sound like, oh, is that really going to take hold? Or is this just a passing thing? Kind of like we thought, social media might be, but, that virtual reality, I'm telling there is something to it. And if I had to wager a guess, that is going to, at some point, become part of just our normal everyday business, our marketing, our life experience. And it's kind of cool, kind of like you were saying, where once you try it out, you're like, whoa, this actually does open up a whole new world. And there are so many like creative things you could do. I went to the the Van Gogh experience in DC, and there was a virtual reality portion of that. And I literally was like walking around in a Van Gogh painting. And I'm like, this is the best thing ever. And I could have sat there all day and done that.
Mhm.
Right. So the opportunities are like endless. And the other cool thing about that is there's another thing that I will talk about incorporating into business, but also being able to give that's along the virtual reality lines, but it's more experiential. I don't want to give too much away, so you'll come back and hear about it. But think about being able, like if you're a makeup company, having, people be able to try the makeup on before they actually have to purchase it, virtually. There's just so many opportunities. Are we going to get to the point where you can like do a virtual version of like test driving a car? Like, who knows? It's super fascinating.
My
saved that-
8-year-old's favorite game is the job simulator. So
Yeah.
I'll be like, what are you doing, son? Working? Yeah, I'm working.
Yes.
So yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's very exciting. And like anything having to do in the digital world, we anticipate that there are going to be, some ways that it might not be used the best way, but
Yeah.
it's definitely going to be a fascinating topic for us to talk about next time, because it is a whole new world. Anything else? All right. Well, it's always such a pleasure to be able to connect with you guys in this way. My email information is on that last slide, my phone number. Feel free to pick up the phone, shoot me an email if you have a question about something specific. And I'm always glad to help.
Hey, thank you so much, Brooke. So our next Lunch and Learn is going to be April 20th, same time. We'll send out a link for that. And then we'll also send out a recording of this to everybody that was registered. So you guys will get this as well. For chamber events, we have our business after hours tomorrow. It's going to be at Weaver Insurance in Waynesboro. Don't forget to wear green. So hopefully we will see you guys tomorrow. And if not, we will see you for our next Lunch and Learn. So thank you guys.
Bye, everybody.